In an era in which we have given up hope on public service, Bob is someone who redeems that concept, someone who has blessed Sarasota over and over again as a public servant. He always selflessly looks beyond his own interests and considers what is best, not only in the moment, not only this year, but in the years and decades ahead for our greater community.
There are a few words that come to mind when I think of Bob. I think of trustworthy, I think of serene, I think of servant heart, erudite, intelligent, extremely eloquent. He's the kind of person within his profession that gives his profession a good name.
When I think of Bob, I think of the true Southern gentleman.
Robert Everett Kimbraugh was born November 2nd, 1933 in Sarasota, Florida.
In what was then the Sarasota Municipal Hospital, which was all of about 10 rooms and 20 beds.
He was the only child of Verman and Edith Everett Kimbraugh. His father was an educator and the first president of Ringling College of Art and Design, then Ringling School of Art and Design.
Ringling College was actually begun in 1931 as a branch of Florida Southern College in Lakeland. My dad was on the faculty there and was assigned here to administer this new campus.
His mother was a full-time homemaker.
I was the only one she had to deal with, so she was with me all the way. She supported me and did everything she could to make me feel at home and loved.
When he was 1 year old, the family moved into an apartment in the north end of what is now the Keating Building on the Ringling School campus.
The students at Ringling were very thoughtful and courteous and nice to me. So I grew up as a young child in a very extended family of the student body at Ringling College.
As a young boy, his father influenced Bob's interest in music.
My father, before he got into education, was a professional singer in Birmingham, Alabama, and New York, and Milan, Italy, and Paris, France.
At 4 years of age, the family purchased a home on Wisteria Street in Sarasota. It was a quaint neighborhood where Bob enjoyed the freedom of walking to Southside School, where he attended first, second, and third grade. In 1942, with the United States having entered World War II, Sarasota became a training ground for the Army Air Corps.
What is now Sarasota-Bradenton Airport was the location. We probably wouldn't have Sarasota-Bradenton Airport, but for the Army. They built it, they cleared it, they built the runways. It was a big operation. This was the final training base for a number of different combat aircraft, starting with P-40s. We also had B-17s. That was short-lived because the foundation for the runways wasn't strong enough to support the heavier bomber aircraft. And the last plane that was training here was P-51s. And this was the final training for the pilots before they left to go into combat.
With the influx of military into the area, Bob's parents felt they needed to do their part and rented their Wisteria home to the military for housing of airmen. They returned to the Ringling School apartment.
So for the 4th, 5th, and 6th grades, I went to Bayhaven School on the north side of town.
While living on the north side of Sarasota, near the airport, Bob was intrigued watching the training exercises of the daredevil pilots in the air above him.
I spent a lot of time looking up and watching the practice dogfights. That was very interesting. You could see them, they were right over, not over the town, generally over the bay is where they did that. The unfortunate part is I also saw a couple of collisions, which were pretty startling.
In the 1940s, Sarasota's junior high classes were held in the same building as the high school.
It was the red brick building on the South Tamiami Trail. I rode my bicycle from Wisteria Street to the high school building on the Tamiami Trail. It was 2 lanes. It had open drainage swales on each side, and a car came by every few minutes.
For leisure activities, he and his friends were drawn to the allurement of the local beach.
Mainly Lido Beach was more cultivated at that time. The Siesta Beach was developed much later in the 50s and 60s.
For Bob, Lido was more than just a weekend place to hang out, as his father, who served as mayor of Sarasota in 1938, was instrumental in securing the funding to construct the popular Lido Casino on Lido Beach. Of course, in the 1940s and 50s, the Ringling Circus, headquartered in Sarasota, provided the city with the nomenclature of Circus City. The circus was a big attraction for visitors and residents alike.
They had a wonderful animal menagerie, and during the fall, after they finished their summer tour in the fall, they would do rehearsals and the public was invited, so there would be big crowds on Sunday afternoon at the circus quarters when they were rehearsing and practicing for their next year's show. It was a big thing.
At that time, like other southern communities, Sarasota schools and the city itself were segregated.
My senior year, there were about 1,200 students in the school. That was 7 through 12. So there were about 200 per class. That was all of the white students in Sarasota County. Booker High School was for the black kids. We were segregated in Sarasota, so the school system was entirely segregated up until the late 1960s. There was no real contact with the African American community here on a social basis, even with young people or adults either. It was truly a segregated city.
In high school, Bob was a good student. He participated in baseball, football, and was on the golf team. Music was an important part of his life. He played clarinet in the high school band.
Then my last 3 years of high school, I also was a clarinetist in what is now the Sarasota Orchestra, which is a whole different story. Don't think of the Sarasota Orchestra then as it is now, because it's no comparison. It was very amateur ensemble back in those days with just community people. There were actually a couple of people who I would refer to nicely as refugees from John Ringling's Czechoslovakian band, that he brought over the Czech band back in the 20s when he was developing St. Armand's Key in South Longboat, and some of them never left, so they were quite good players.
Faith in God was instilled in Bob by his parents at a young age. His mother's hope was that he would become a Presbyterian minister. When he graduated from Sarasota High School in 1951, he enrolled in Davidson College in Davidson, North Carolina.
And Davidson was and is a Presbyterian school and has been over the years a feeder for Presbyterian seminaries in the South, and it was all men. Very old school, claims to be the only higher education institution in the South that did not close its doors during the war between the states.
While Bob had positive experiences in his religious activities at Davidson, he decided he did not feel called to the ministry and majored in business. While at Davidson, he met Emily Hudson, a young co-ed who would change his life. She was the sister of his roommate. During one summer, he and his roommate were spending a weekend at a summer camp in North Carolina, which was owned by his roommate's family.
She had just graduated from high school and was starting college. So we met there. I was there for 2 days, so that was our first meeting.
I was very impressed with Bob at the very first meeting. It took 2 or 3 years for our relationship to develop, and then he left to go to Korea.
While at Davidson, Bob was a member of the ROTC program. He graduated from Davidson in 1955 with a bachelor's degree in business. The United States was heavily involved in the Korean conflict at that time. Bob soon found himself entering the military.
We graduated in the morning. Then those of us that had done the senior ROTC program gathered in a room in the student union and received our commissions as lieutenants in the Army Reserve, walked in the next room and got our orders to report to active duty.
Now Lieutenant Robert Kimbraugh, he was sent to Fort Knox for training. 4 months later, was on his way to the Far East as an armored tank unit commander. He soon found himself at the end of the earth near the border of South and North Korea.
I remember being aghast at the bleakness of the geography. The war had just torn Korea to pieces. There were no trees, no green. We pulled in a compound of where there were 22 tanks in the motor pool, 5 butler buildings, and 3 very nice tents. And that was my home for the next 16 months. We were attached to the 21st Infantry. I guess there was some communication. I never met the regimental commander. We were just on our own. We had our own mess, our own supply. We got gasoline and oil products delivered daily. All we did was maintain the vehicles. We were at the end of the line. We were the farthest unit away from Washington that was in the Army at that time.
While in Korea, he and Emily stayed in contact, and their relationship flourished.
She was in college at the time. She wrote me a letter every day. And I had not a lot to do, so I wrote her back every day. And that was mainly our courtship.
A year and a half later, in 1957, when his tour of duty was over, he returned to Sarasota and immediately told his parents he was heading to Tallahassee. Emily was graduating from Florida State, and Bob was going to propose. When he met her, he presented more of a business negotiation than a marriage proposal.
He came to my graduation from Florida State University and said, let's get married.
She was getting a teacher's certificate. Her major was early childhood education. I said, I think I want to go to law school. I think I could get in because they do favors for veterans, and I'm a newly minted veteran. And Daddy said he could try to get you a teaching job in Gainesville, and we would get married and do that. And she said, okay.
We determined, considering family schedules, that August would be a good time. So we were married August 24th, 1957.
Bob's father, who served as Sarasota County School Board Superintendent from 1945 to 1953 and was then president of the Florida School Superintendents Association, used his connections to arrange for Emily a job interview in Gainesville. She was offered the job but had to report to work on August 19th, just a few days before her wedding, which would be held in Miami on August 24th.
And I explained to her that I was getting married the 24th, and she said, if you want this job, you will be here on the 19th. So I went, my brother drove me to Gainesville. Bob had already found an apartment, and I went to my first job.
The principal did let her off on Wednesday before our wedding on Saturday. And she caught a plane from Gainesville back to Miami.
Flew home, had bridesmaids luncheon on Friday, got married on Saturday night, and I had to be back at work on Monday morning.
Sunday, the day after our wedding, driving back to Gainesville so she could go to work on Monday. School started on Monday, so that was our honeymoon.
While Emily taught grade school, Bob attended law school at the University of Florida. During this time, the couple's first son, James, was born on November 7, 1959. The following year, Bob graduated from law school and set his sights on returning to Sarasota.
All those graduating were selecting where they wanted to live and were interviewing with law firms. And at that time, I said, Bob, where are you going to interview? And he said, we are going to live in Sarasota. This was his home and this is where he wanted to live. So that he wanted to come back to Sarasota.
After I'd taken the bar exam and had become admitted to the bar, I went to work the next Monday. The senior partner brought me a stack of files, 13 estate cases that had been opened and administered but not closed. And the probate judge had kind of gotten on them for not closing these files, and he put them down carefully on my desk. He said, here's 13 estate files. I would like for you to get them closed. Okay, yes sir. But I had no idea how I was going to do that. So other people helped me. Anyway, I got that done. So my first assignment was probate law.
Shortly after returning to Sarasota, their second son, Robert Jr., was born.
December 19th, 1961. So then we had two babies, and I considered myself retired from the school system and raised the children. Bob cared very much for the children. He also worked very hard. So when he was with them, he was a very kind, appreciative father. He was very good at providing whatever they needed.
In his practice, Bob soon discovered he was not comfortable working for a group practice, and in 1964 opened his own practice. While probate law was his primary interest, he found success would be measured by doing what was necessary.
As a young lawyer, when I first opened my own office, though, I did everything that walked in the door was my specialty. And then another family friend, lawyer, said, if you want to open an office, if you decide you want to do that, I can feed you enough business to start with that you can live. And I said, that's such a great opportunity that I just couldn't turn that down.
Bob worked long and hard hours for many years as a single attorney practitioner. After several years, he brought in a partner. He was the son of family friends.
And I've had a great association with Craig Coach until right now. We're still partners, although 2 years ago we together combined our offices with another larger law firm, so we're now part of really good group of lawyers here in Sarasota.
As Bob was building a successful law practice and helping his clients, he was also using his talent to help the community and several civic organizations.
Over 45 years, I was on 7 different boards and chairman of 5 of them.
Bob has served in so many different capacities, so many different organizations, from the Salvation Army to Plymouth Harbor to Pines to Spanish Point. Of course, Ringling College has always been close to his heart because of his father's history there.
Bob is an incredible board member, giving of his time with his knowledge of law. It certainly was extremely valuable to us as a number of issues related to expertise which he could provide. But equally important, he was always very thoughtful, wasn't the loudest person in the room, but when Bob talked, you would listen because you always knew that he had a message, a clear message that he wanted to impart, and that was one of sharing the wisdom that he had. Bob served as one of the longest serving members of our board from 1979 to 2006, 27 years. And during that time, he was also the chairman of our board of directors from 1986 to 1989, the period of time in which a number of things happened, including the construction of our assisted living facility, which at the time was the very first assisted living facility in all of Sarasota. So Bob made a tremendous investment of time and energy on our organization, and it was an invaluable service.
My experience of Bob in these last 2 years has been a gentleman who is willing and able to offer his very best to those either in the legal field, in ministry, in a wide variety of responsibilities in the community, as a mentor, as a guide, as someone who takes the time and gives the energy to devote himself to those coming along after him.
He was the only one in our history that was president for 3 years. And he always did a wonderful job in whatever he was expected to do. And when time came for me to retire, he was the head of the search committee to choose the new conductor.
Bob is a very loyal person. He was always available. He was always there, he was always available, and always very willing to fill in where he was needed. And the community seemed to recognize that, and they seemed to call upon him with great regularity when something needed to be done.
Yes, I've been active. I've enjoyed that. I've met wonderful people, and I do feel like I've made a contribution to the community.
Bob also lent his voice to his church choir and key chorale.
Very amateur singing career. Been in 3 auditioned choruses. I have yet to suffer a failure to succeed in the audition.
Bob has a very good singing voice. He has been singing in the First Presbyterian Church choir. I believe now it's hitting on 55 years. He's sang in key chorale. He enjoys choral work. He enjoys concerts. He appreciates many fine points about music.
He brings an excellent voice, but what is most important for an organization like Key Chorale is that sense of collaboration, of submerging yourself in the tonal fabric that the group is making, responding to our conductor and artistic director's requests, and working hard to learn the music, because there's a lot of music in the course of a year. And since we rehearse only once a week normally, it takes quite a lot of concentration. And of course, Bob, as an attorney, specializes in concentration.
when I was conducting, we had a day at Christmas time for the singing of the Messiah, and people came from the churches from all over Sarasota, and he was always there and always singing. And of course, when the symphony did the Beethoven Ninth, I conducted that twice, and he was a very staunch member of the chorus.
In his personal life, Bob became a licensed pilot, flying to business and family events throughout the eastern United States. He obtained his commercial license, although he did not fly a commercial plane. Although one event came close, when Anita Bryant was here for a YMCA function and had to be in Winter Haven in the afternoon for a concert. He was contacted and asked if he could fly her. Bob had a plane lined up at Jones Aviation.
I got to the airport. The line had pulled the plane out of the hangar, had run a red carpet from the office out to the plane, and Ms. Bryan and her companion arrived a few minutes later. We got in and off we went to Winter Haven. But I did not get, I was pleased to have the opportunity to do that without getting paid.
Bob Kimbraugh has been a tireless advocate for our community. He places his faith as a significant factor in his life.
When I was young, I had no choice. I was in church because there was no alternative for me. Now I'm in church out of an abiding faith and belief that there is a God who is alive and who is working his plan for us.
We asked Bob Kimbraugh his advice for those who follow.
We need to concentrate on education. To me, that's the answer for the future of the world. Good education, intense schooling, and not be afraid to interject some moral principles into that education. If we live for today, we're going to die today. We got to live for the future and preserve humanity.